844. Text will be charged at your standard message rate. Do check with your network provider for exact costs. And of course, you can contact us on social media. It's at BBC Woman's Hour, or you can email us through our website. Now, around 15 British families remain detained in North East Syria. Today, a new report by the NGO Reprieve suggests that the majority of British women there are victims of trafficking, based on evidence that these women were all subjected to sexual and other forms of exploitation and were either transported to Syria as children, coerced into travelling to Syria, or kept and moved within Syria against their will. Some of these women were as young as 12 when they were trafficked. To discuss this, I'm joined by Maya Foa, Executive Director of Reprieve, and Andrew Mitchell MP, co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Trafficked Britons in Syria, a cross-party grouping of MPs and peers. Morning to you both. Maya, let me come to you first, because you've just returned from a camp in Syria. You got unprecedented levels of access. Who did you speak to there, and what's the situation in the camps?
Thank you. Yes, so I just got back. I met with a lot of our British clients, a lot of the families who, as you just described, were victims of trafficking and taken from Britain to Syria. But I also met with many other women from many other countries, and was really, even with the knowledge I had of the situation of the families detailed in the report, I was shocked to hear these repeated stories, one after the other, of systemic trafficking and abuse. It was an eye-opener for me, and I hope will be an eye-opener also for governments who are reading the report and listening to this programme.
Could you tell us some of the stories that you heard from women? A lot of people listening, this might be the first time they're even considering something like this. For them, these are young women who left of their own free will to join terrorist organisations. When you say they were trafficked, what kind of stories were they telling you?
Absolutely. There are a couple of different types of stories. One of them, a woman told me, she was from a European country, and I'm preserving anonymity just for her safety.
Of course.
Described being very young. She was a teenager when she married a man who was older than her. He was extremely abusive. She actually showed me some of the marks of the abuse, which she still has. He left her when she was pregnant, and she's still a teenager, said that she should meet him in Turkey. She agreed to meet him in Turkey. She wanted to make this marriage work. In Turkey, he wasn't there. And she was met by men who said that they were friends of his. And they said, no, we'll take you to him. We'll take you to him. And this woman sat before me crying as she described how these first men said, he's over here. And she went with them. And then the next set of men said, no, you just have to get into the car over here, took her somewhere else. And then pointed to a car and said, your husband's in that car. She didn't speak the language. She was in a foreign country. She was pregnant. She was a teenager. She went to the car. And her husband wasn't in the car. And this car transported her across the border into Syria, long journeys, which she described, and obviously terrified. When she ultimately did meet this husband of hers, he said, well, I couldn't tell you where I was taking you. Otherwise, you would never have agreed to come. So that's just one example of the kind of, that's the deceit example. Other people were forced through, exploitation and coercion. These were very, very vulnerable individuals who were targeted because of their vulnerability. And that's the kind of story I just kept hearing and emphasized that this was a practice, systemic practice by ISIS.
And one of the, well, she was a young girl, was only 12 years old when this happened to her.
Absolutely, yeah. This was a young British girl, was taken over, had no idea where she was going, probably thought she was going on, in fact, did think she was going on a trip, was excited about the trip, had a bit of travel sickness, ended up being transported across, again, from Turkey to Syria. She was 12. She was then, with the rest of the women who we spoke with, trapped in this prison and not allowed to leave until and unless she agreed to marry, which she was forced to do, age 14.
Yeah. What's the reality of their lives once they get there? How have they then kept within the camps?
So under ISIS, in ISIS territory, they were imprisoned from the moment they arrived. They were not allowed to leave. It was for the purpose of servitude. So they had to do forced labor. They were brought over to be wives to men to provide children for the so-called caliphate. So sexual exploitation was at the heart of this regime under ISIS. They were entrapped, not enslaved, not allowed to leave, abused in ways that are really awful. And so those people who have now ended up in the camps in North East Syria are women and girls and children who have suffered enormous harm at the hands of ISIS. They are not supporters. These women who I spoke with, they have the opposite of support for ISIS. They are the people who can tell you all of the wrongs and the harms and the evils of that regime. And all they want to do is come home and protect their children and reintegrate into society and rebuild their lives.
Andrew, let me bring you in here, because this is a very different story to what we've heard before when Shamima Begum had her passport cancelled and her citizenship taken away by the government. We were told that she poses a significant national security risk.
Yes, we were. And there's no doubt that the British government are concerned about the security and cost aspects of returning these people to the United Kingdom. But the truth is that we should all be extremely grateful to Maya and her colleagues at Reprieve, this British charity, for explaining to the British public the reality behind what is going on. And there are two key aspects to this, really. The first is a security aspect, and the second is a humanitarian aspect. The security aspect is this, that these people, some of whom may be very dangerous, are swilling around in ungoverned space in a lawless part of the world. And that is why the Americans have asked all countries to repatriate their nationals. And indeed, I think they're quite frustrated with Britain, because many other countries, including Russia, are repatriating their nationals, but Britain is not doing so. And they've offered to help bring them home to Britain if that will be of assistance to the British government. Now, Britain is in dereliction of its duties, because we are one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. We should be setting a good example. And if these people are dangerous, then they are prey to being exploited by bad people, and they could be a danger not only to those in the region, but also to the wider world and to us in Britain on the streets of London and Birmingham. But the humanitarian aspect is this. Many of these people have been trafficked, and we passed legislation in Britain in 2015 under Theresa May's premiership, the Modern Slavery Act, specifically designed to stop children being trafficked. And we were talking here mainly about children being trafficked for sexual exploitation, but many of these people, including Shamima Begum, were children when they were lured or trafficked to Syria. And Shamima Begum has been stereotyped because she appears in a hijab. But actually, there are more recent pictures show her as any Western girl would be shown, in jeans and a T-shirt, clutching her mobile phone, in very dangerous and deprived circumstances in these camps.
Well, we've had a statement from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and they said our priority is to ensure the safety and security of the UK. Those who remain in Syria include dangerous individuals who chose to stay to fight or otherwise support a group that committed atrocious crimes, including butchering and beheading innocent civilians. The Foreign Secretary made it clear in Parliament that where we become aware of British unaccompanied or orphan children, or if British children are able to seek consular assistance, we will work to facilitate their return, subject to national security concerns. What's your reaction to that?
Well, as I said at the beginning of my comments, that there are security aspects for this. But the question for us is it more dangerous to leave them swilling around in ungoverned space and not held to account? Or is it better to face up to our international responsibilities, bring them back, and if they've committed crimes, put them before the courts? And it's a matter of responsibility, but the security dangers to us in Britain, as well as in the North East Syria, are very great from leaving them swilling around in this area.
And now you're co-chair of the APPG across this. What are you seeking to establish? What happens next?
Well, we're seeking to make sure, firstly, that the facts of this matter are understood, because I think often they have not been understood. And then we want to help the government get to the right place in security terms, in terms of its international responsibilities. And my co-chair, Lord Jay, the most senior civil servant in the Foreign Office, former ambassador to Paris, as well as Lynn Brown, my Labour colleague, the three of us are hoping that we cover both major political parties and both houses in Parliament, and are able to get our colleagues to focus on this in the hope that the government will review its policy and see whether there isn't a better way of dealing with this, both on security grounds as well as on humanitarian grounds.
And Maya, very quickly, what recommendations would you like to put to the government?
The government needs to repatriate the small number of British families who are left out in North East Syria for the reasons that Andrew Mitchell just set out. But also, I find, just in response to the comment from the Foreign Office, the idea that girls who were trafficked aged 12 are now being viewed as major security risks just shows how far the government is from understanding the reality of the situation. They need to be doing what we and what this fantastic all-party parliamentary group is doing, which is really interrogating what happened, both from a human rights perspective, rule of law perspective, and a security perspective. That's what we can expect from our government.
And I'm sure we'll be coming back to this when the report is published. Andrew Mitchell and Maya Foa, thank you very much for joining me. Now,